Hello everybody, welcome to an edition of Kuba Fantasy. I am of course Kuba Fantasy, and in this short video I'm going to go over the picks that I made for week 9 in my Sit 'em Stardom. Basically every week I make Sit 'em Stardom picks, and I'm going to recap the picks that I made, and let's just go over how they did and how well I did with the picks. And I believe it was actually a pretty good week for me, so let's get right into it, guys. Actually, quickly before I do this, you can visit me online, KubaFantasy.com, Twitter @Blackie_Mike, and subscribe to my videos here on YouTube, because that all helps me out very, very much. Alright, my stardom list was started off with Josh Freeman versus Oakland. He actually had a pretty good game once again, 18 of 30, 248 yards, for 248 yards, 2 TDs, and 20 rush yards. So again, another solid effort from the young Buccaneers quarterback. He was too short sort of having his 20th point of the game, which would have been very nice. Doug Martin absolutely decimated the Raiders' defense in what is one of the biggest fantasy performances ever. But Freeman was still able to have his points as well. So Doug Martin is one of the hottest guys in the fantasy football world right now. But I'm thinking that I think that teams are gonna have to plan for that, which might actually open up some more windows for Josh Freeman and keep his value up. And then Matt Schaub. 19 for 27 with 268 yards and 2 TDs. Another good game, very similar to Freeman's. A bit more yardage, but didn't have the rushing yardage, so it was actually a bit less value in him. I think it was about 18 points compared to the 19 from Freeman. But these are the type of matchups that you want to exploit from quarterbacks like Schaub. He's not going to put up monster numbers every week, but in matchups against bad defenses like this, he's going to have his chance to have some value for you. And then finally, my third quarterback was Joe Flacco. Didn't have the greatest game, 153 yards and a touchdown. Probably should have seen that coming. Didn't do a whole lot. Ray Rice rushed for about 80 yards and a touchdown. Backup Bernard Pierce rushed for a touchdown on their 32 rushing attempts. So that's pretty much where most of their offense came from, whereas Freeman only had 24 pass attempts. So yeah, going forward, I think I would prefer to have Freeman or Schaub, the two other guys from the list, on my team. And then for running backs, I suggested Trent Richardson have another good game, and he did. 105 yards on 25 carries and then 6 catches, 31 yards. No touchdown, which would have been very nice, but still, you can't complain about 13 points from a guy you're starting. And then Mike Eldershour had an amazing day, 16 rush attempts for 70 yards and 3 touchdowns. Not like the 70 yards isn't massive, but the 3 scores makes it a huge day for him. Joique Bell, the backup running back, also had 73 yards and a touchdown. It was just a monster game for the Detroit Lions running game here. So it's good to see them showing some balance in their aerial attack and their running attack. I'm liking Mike Eldershour going forward, although he does have some mixed matchups in terms of easy and hard. And then Deshaun Jackson, I suggested you start him, and he did have one of his very few good games of the season. 3 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. A 77-yard touchdown, which pretty much gave him all he needed for his fantasy day. Because other than his touchdown score, he only had 2 catches, 23 yards. So I'm still not a big fan of Deshaun Jackson, but this was one of the weeks to start him, and he cashed in. And then Buffalo, Stevie Johnson, 3 catches, 29 yards. I was hoping he'd have to do more against the Houston Texans. Buffalo was down the whole game. Not as big as you would expect. But yeah, Stevie Johnson wasn't really involved as much as I thought he would. And then Greg Olsen versus Washington. Brandon LaFell did not play, so Olsen was kind of the number 2 option for them in the air, although he didn't really have the biggest game, 5 catches, 48 yards. It was Steve Smith actually was the perk for Carolina. He had his first touchdown catch of the year, which you pretty much expected going against Washington. I would have been pretty disappointed in him if he didn't. But yeah, Greg Olsen didn't have the game I was hoping for. I'm not really a big fan of Greg Olsen this year. I was hoping he'd be able to have more production in Carolina. And then Owen Daniels had another solid game at the tight end position. He had a 39-yard touchdown catch earlier in the game. I didn't do a whole lot the rest of the game. I didn't really need to, because he had 12 points in the end off his 60-some-odd yards and a touchdown catch. He's looking like one of the best and most consistent tight ends in the league right now. So you got to be happy if you drafted this guy, because you know it wasn't very early. And then on to the sit-em side of the list. Brandon Weeden versus Baltimore. 176 yards, 2 interceptions, only 11 rush yards. Another rough game from the rookie Weeden. Less than 200 rushing yards on his 37 attempts. A pair of interceptions, so I'm not really expecting much more from him next week against the Cowboys either. So if this is a guy you had been starting for a bit, he did have some good weeks, you want to be sitting him again next week, I think. And Christian Ponder, another terrible week for him, only 63 yards, 11 of 22 in terms of his attempts. He was massively outmatched by Russell Wilson, who threw 3 touchdowns. Adrian Peterson was a monster in this game, going for 182 yards and 2 touchdowns. So yeah, I'm not liking Christian Ponder much right now. I do not trust him at all. Chris Johnson versus Chicago was having a terrible game. He only had about 60 yards, and he had 2 fumbles until all of a sudden he busted out an 80-yard touchdown run when the game was already out of reach, so it didn't really matter, but still sucks for if you had sit him, because I know I did one league, and he ended up having this big score right at the end that I didn't really see coming. And then Donald Brown and Vic Ballard, neither one of them had a huge game, although Donald Brown didn't really play. Ballard ended up with 60 yards, rushing, 38 receiving, so not terrible, a 9-point game. And I think he has a really good matchup coming up next week, so I think that's going to be on the Week 10 stardom side. And then Fred Jackson and C.J. Spiller. Spiller had 102 total yards, so he was the guy to start out of him and Jackson. I keep saying that I like Jackson more. I still do, but I might have to rethink things, because Spiller is showing a bit more explosiveness. He always has, but he's just making more out of the touches he's getting than Jackson is right now. Miles Austin, 7 catches, 76 yards. Not a great game from him. If you were expecting a touchdown, it went to Kevin Ogletree. So if you sat him, it was probably a good choice. 7 points isn't going to do much for you. Hakeem Nicks, 1 catch, 10 yards, with only I think he only had about 2 or 3 targets on the day. So Hakeem Nicks is still struggling with that injury, I guess. Victor Cruz had 11 targets. So that kind of shows you where their offense is leaning right now. So I'm pretty worried about Nicks again for Week 10. And then Titus Young, 2 catches, 20 yards. So as I predicted, this game was all about the Detroit running game, as they scored 4 touchdowns. Calvin Johnson had about 130 yards. So yeah, it was a bad matchup for Titus Young. And another guy, though, who I do believe has a great matchup in Week 10 and very well could be on the stardom list. And then Jermichael Finley versus Arizona, only had 1 catch for 6 yards. Not gonna lie, guys, this was kind of a scapegoat. Couldn't really find a tight end with a terrible matchup. They've all kind of no one's really been outstanding this year at the tight end position, save maybe like the elite guys like Gronkowski. Tony Gonzalez has been real good, and Owen Daniels has been really good. But that's about it. So yeah, Jermichael Finley, he's been a huge dud, and probably will be for a few more weeks also. Alright guys, so that was my Week 9 Sit 'em Stardom recap video. Those are the guys I told you to sit in Week 9 and start. I hope it helped. Once again, you can find me online. My blog is KoopaFantasy.com, KOOPA Fantasy.com. You can follow me on Twitter, ask me questions anytime. I'm very active on Twitter. I always get back to people. It's @Blackie with the IE at the end, _Mike. And then finally, like, subscribe my videos here on YouTube, because that supports me, guys. It's all great. Thank you very much. Koopa Fantasy, out.